Hello and welcome to Dead Cells. I'll explain what little you need to know about this game along the way, but let's just get right into it. Run number 1. I was still figuring out how to move, let alone how not to get shot in the face, so I came to a pretty quick and pretty pathetic death by the enemies at the first level. But of course, in Run 2, I learned from my mistakes and therefore knew what not to do. Oh, no, never mind. In Run 3, I found this strange slug person that sells handy items, but I couldn't afford any of his wares. I also found this cool ice grenade, but before I had the opportunity to test it, I found the doorway to the next level. The passageways between each level are filled with many quirky characters, the most important of which being the Collector. In exchange for cells, which drop from dead enemies, he'll give you permanent upgrades that will persist even after you die. You might be wondering what he does with all those cells, but the answer's obvious. He's clearly inhaling them. The next level is the Promenade of the Condemned, known worldwide for its interesting decorational choices. In this building, I was provided a choice between two weapons, a throwing knife or a wolf trap. I chose for the throwing knife. It's not to be confused with regular knives, which aren't for throwing. Also, when I hit an enemy with them, they start to bleed, which drains their health. After a close encounter with idiocy, I was brought down to 3 points of health, but using the trademark master strategy of a wise friend of mine, I was somehow able to avoid the crowds of enemies that filled the level, and despite all odds, managed to find my way to the next one. I purchased a health flask from the Collector and unlocked the blood sword because it sounded cool, then entered the ramparts. I didn't know any of this new terrain or these new enemies very well though, so it was only a matter of time before I died to death. Run 4, I found a bench, which is a cool reference to Hollow Knight, a game I've also played in the past. Dead Cells is actually brimming with references to other games and media, some of which I even recognized. Anyway, the bench gave me a pure nail, which allows me to downslash and pogo on enemies. Instead of going to the Promenade of the Condemned again, I figured I might as well explore my options and went to the Toxic Sewers, a level that's completely infested with giant rats, poisonous liquid, and whatever these things are, so it didn't take a lot of time for me to pass away. Run number 5, I was starting to get pretty comfortable with level 1. I found this thing called a sinew splicer, which is like the throwing knife from a minute ago, except it does the throwing part for me. I also got a wolf trap, an item that roots enemies in place, rendering them unable to move and making them more vulnerable to my attacks. And a frying pan, which is actually a surprisingly effective weapon. Not a very good shield though. Run 6, I found a new item that allows me to take damage. That's it. That's the item. Why would anyone use this? Sometimes you'll encounter these types of rooms in which you can fight elite enemies. They're basically normal enemies except they have more health and their own fancy room. Anyway, I took on more than I could chew and died to this one. In run number 7, basically the first thing I found when I walked out the front door was another elite room. Except this one was a shield dude. I wasn't taking any chances and employed my awesome tactic of supreme bravery and dipped. Later, I stumbled upon a not at all menacing pile of bones and grabbed one. When you hit enemies repeatedly with a bone, it will turn into a whirlwind of hits that will rapidly massacre anything and anyone that dares to even look at you. An ancient fighting technique I believe the masters call boning. And to provide support for my superior boning techniques, I transferred enough money to the bank account of Hogwarts to acquire ice magic that allows me to, well, freeze stuff. Kind of intuitive. With these two weapons at my side, no enemy was safe from getting boned to death, and I easily found my way to the ramparts again. Unfortunately, that peaceful visit turned into a violent murder. Run number 8. Fun fact, for every enemy you kill in a row without taking damage, your kill streak counter goes up. When you manage to kill 30 enemies in level 1 without taking a single point of damage, you get special rewards when you complete it. We're back at the ramparts again, but this time I didn't die, and managed to get to the 4th level. The Black Bridge is actually phenomenally easy because there's only a single enemy there. Just one slight problem, it's a boss. I actually came very close to beating it first time, but once it started jumping, I was done for. Run 9, I found a cool new item again called Polo Power, which turns you into a very explosive chicken. I was informed by trustworthy sources that apparently you can break the golden doors behind which some of the items were locked. My informant forgot to mention the small detail, however, that doing so will make me cursed, which means that if I get hit once, I die instantly. The only way to lift this curse is to kill 10 enemies, all without getting hit, and I actually failed really hard in trying that. Run number 10. To celebrate the double digits, I turned on sounds. Hope you'll enjoy that. I actually got to a kill streak of 27 in the Promenade, that's what the cool kids are calling it, before some sword wannabe poked me and brought it all the way back to 0. I was just busy getting to the second stage of grief about that when I passed by a giant glowing golden orb. After I took care of the passersby, it turned out to be a so-called treasure item. A pure nail. A really good pure nail. It was so good that I easily massacred my way through the ramparts. These enemies really didn't know what hit them. By the time they remembered to look up, they no longer had a neck to do so. I defeated the ramparts, then made my way to the Black Bridge again. I was actually able to beat the boss this time, and not necessarily because I have a better health potion and actually good equipment now, but because I just grew as a person between those two runs. The boss drops some nice goodies, including golden teeth for some reason. He probably brushed his teeth 1,000 times and unlocked the special skin. Next up is the Stilt Village, a place with more pirate captains than zombies, which in some way implies that before the whole apocalypse thing, more residents of this village were pirate captains than anything else. I figured I might as well change things up a bit and opted to exchange my ice bow for a shield, which was a mistake I would never make again. I am personally of the opinion that shields kind of suck. They're like range weapons, except the only way to activate them is up close, right before an enemy hits you. My strategy is killing things like a lawnmower. Tactical retreats are not my forte. I either destroy everything or die miserably while trying. Not having an ice bow anymore certainly helped in speeding up that process. Run numero 11. I know I just said I don't do shields anymore, but I figured I might as well practice with them a little bit, since no matter how you look at it, it's probably better than the starter bow. But to perfectly parry an enemy, you have to raise your shield right before their attack, and if you're not successful in the timing, you'll just get hit. I quickly exchanged my shield for some ice magic because I prefer my equipment to have, use. While visiting the collector, I was introduced to a particularly shady looking individual offering his services in reforging. If I throw truly ludicrous amounts of money at him, he'll upgrade or reroll the modifiers of a weapon of my choosing. I found another treasure item with some really good modifiers, which allow me to one-shot most enemies in the rampart, so it shouldn't really come as a surprise that the boss wasn't much of an obstacle. I still died in the Stilt Village though. Turns out this game has bellflies too. In run 12, I wondered what would happen if I broke another fancy door before the curse of the first one was lifted. Apparently, you just get double cursed. I reforged my bone to launch a grenade that deals extra damage whenever I swing it, then proceeded to the Promenade of the Condemned and successfully lifted the curse despite its residents' best efforts. I was then forced to make a heartbreaking choice between my bone and a pure nail. It's like a parent being asked who their favorite child is. Anyway, I eventually chose to leave the nail behind. The bone is my favorite child. I'm sorry, but I just love boning with... Okay, I'm sorry. I'll stop saying that. Oh, by the way, I found this greed shield. I know, shields suck, but this one gives me money, and I'm a pretty big fan of money. When you successfully parry an enemy with a greed shield, you'll knock its teeth out, which are, of course, golden. And every enemy can drop golden teeth, which leaves us with the only logical explanation that the island's dentist is King Midas. But the problem with me and shields is that I actually try to use them. If I don't time the parry correctly, which happens quite often, I essentially just let the enemy hit me. So I exchanged the greed shield with a far superior bow. I did proceed to get kind of clapped though, but that's not because of my weapons, but because at that precise moment, a very large muted mosquito actually happens to land on my monitor, obstructing my view of the game. So we can mark this death off as mosquito RNG. Anyhoozle, it's time for run 13. I found a campfire in the middle of a zombie-infested dungeon and didn't see a reason why not to take a nap, and I woke up with a new weapon before me. The King's Scepter possesses the special ability that whenever you hit an enemy, it throws you into the air. If you then manage to land on the head of something, you'll do some minor damage to it. Now, you might be wondering, hey Peem, isn't that just really annoying, and doesn't that weapon kind of suck? Moving on, I managed to complete the first level in under 2 minutes, granting me a bunch of rewards, one of which being a frying pan, and to be honest, I'd rather use my butt cheeks as a weapon than the King's Scepter. Might not be very effective, but at least it would look funny. After some trash disposal and some sick parkour, I found my way to and off the ramparts again. Run number 14. I bought an upgrade from the collector that allows me to start out with random weapons, not just the same sword and bow every time, which did great in variating my runs. The run eventually ended when I was unable to keep my number of hit points above 0. In run number 15, I got some firebrands and a bone, already some of my favorite weapons. When animated 19, I stumbled upon the door to the toxic sewers. I made the split-second decision to walk through, because I figured that extra loot was worth it. I upgraded my bone to add a grenade modifier and casually kept myself busy with some good old-fashioned pest control until the pests decided to fight back and I suddenly found myself to forget how to exist. In run 16, I unlocked the third level of my health flask, which meant I could heal 3 times in each level, and then reforge my bone to deal bonus damage against burning targets, which was perfect since I also had firebrands. So with the combination of Pyromania and Bone Jitsu, I burned my way through my enemies, but then found out the hard way that I can't catch arrows with my teeth. I'd had enough and decided to go to the Promenade of the Condemned in run 17, but then didn't go to the Rampers and instead entered the side door to the ossuary. It's a place just absolutely riddled with piles upon piles of mangled dead corpses, and I got the impression it would have loved to add me to its collection. I found the cursed treasure chest, which will give me a bunch of loot, but also curse me. But I survived that curse with relative ease and ended the Black Bridge at 21 minutes. I insulted the boss's mother until it rage quit, and then fought my way through the Stilt Village. I killed this elite zombie, which dropped this so-called war spear, and I mean, it was okay. It got me to the next level at least, the Forgotten Sepulchre. I purchased a backpack from the collector, which allows me to carry an extra item, then walked into the first room, where this creature greeted me, telling me that the light of the guardian monoliths will guide me. Whatever the f*** that means. She pointed me to a fancy door, which, after reforging that war spear, I wasn't nearly rich enough to afford. So I made the decision to completely ignore the pretentious cryptic and to continue without getting the light. I quickly discovered there were lamps placed throughout the level that lit up whenever I walked close to them. Very quickly I came to the discovery that straying away from the light will cause a sort of darkness effect to cover my screen, causing me to take damage. You know, don't starve? Yeah, it's that. So suddenly, there was a rush to find the next light, before Charlie would get me. And in my haste, I unfortunately had to brutally massacre a couple of enemies, including this elite dark tracker. I found a door, only to discover that the enormous wall-mounted keyhole wasn't for decoration, then lawnmowered my way to the key I needed. Some more peaceful negotiation later, I found another one, which, after some pretty stressful parkour, opened a second door that led straight to the entrance to the clock room. The fact that the level's name refers only to a single room instead of a wider area makes me suspect that, yep, that's the boss. Even though I'd never even seen this boss before, let alone beaten it, I still did pretty well, even bringing it to its second phase before, you know, getting annihilated. Run 18. I unlocked the knife dance, which isn't really a dance and more of just throwing a bunch of knives around you, and ended the Black Bridge at just under 17 minutes. I actually had another, much larger muted mosquito land on my monitor, forcing me to continue the boss fight with nothing but my sense of sound to rely on. I'd say I did pretty well. In run number 19, I found this godly electric whip. Whips don't require precision or coordination or strategy or skill. You just press X and it damages the nearest enemy, even through shields. Before I could find anything better to serve as a secondary weapon, I equipped a greed shield on my offhand. But by the time I entered the Black Bridge, I still didn't have a replacement for it, meaning I had to start the boss fight with whip and shield. And you wouldn't believe it. The first two mosquitoes birthed the third, and it ate both its parents and doubled in... oh wait, no, I beat it. Nice. I was also beginning to figure out how the enemies in the Stilt Village worked, allowing me to beat the level at a much more comfortable and consistent degree. Before I knew it, I was already back in the Forgotten Sepulchre. I'd already beaten it first try, but I was curious what the light would actually do for me if I had the wealth to buy it. Turns out, it's not a permanent effect that makes you immune from the darkness, but a skill, meaning I had to replace it with my wolf trap or ice grenade. And that just wasn't happening. And apparently, neither was my life. In run 20, I gave the toxic sewers another chance, only this time, when I left, I was still breathing. I cyberbullied the boss to death, saw a cool treasure item, shouted, "Ooh, shiny," and clumsily tripped over an explosive cannonball. In run 21, I opted to exchange my ice bow with a magic bow, which shoots heat-seeking missiles instead of arrows, but then reforged my pure nail to make me receive twice as much damage, and since the boss could actually move now, that ended up being not much of a pro gamer move. But in run 22, I got my second chance, because I started out with a pure nail and reforged it to instill poison on hits, and to say that turned out pretty okay would be an understatement, because I ended up getting a kill streak of 83 in the toxic sewers. I also unlocked this magnetic grenade, spiked shield, infantry bow, and rapier, and exchanged the latter for my pure nail. But later on, that didn't turn out as good as I hoped, so I exchanged it with the treasure item I stored in my backpack until I found an even better pure nail, which, of course, I couldn't pass up. It has a modifier that makes cute little alien parasites parasites hatch from my victims. Great for mowing through large crowds, but useless in boss fights, so I used another weapon to kill the boss. But then I accidentally dropped the pure nail near the reforging dude, so I was vastly undergeared for the Stilled Village, and died of stupidity. Run 23 went much of the same, except I died to an elite enemy in the toxic sewers because I'd equipped a weapon that doubled the damage I took. In run 24, I went back to my comfort zone and did the freezing enemies on site strategy again, mainly because the recent stupid devs had kind of annoyed me, and for the moment I was done trying new things. I equipped a mutation called Frostbite, which makes it so that frozen enemies get dealt a bunch of damage even when I'm not hitting them. In case you don't know how the mutations in Dead Cells work, they're a bit like the mutations in Grounded, which are a bit like the charms in Hollow Knight, which are basically a straight ripoff of the mutations in Dead Cells. I went to the ossuary instead of the ramparts and tested out my Ice Magic plus Frostbite tactic, which turned out to do pretty well. So well, in fact, that just freezing enemies was often already enough to kill them. I beat the ossuary with 31 points of health left, then unlocked the Ice Shield and exchanged it for my melee weapon. I figured that since freezing enemies was already so strong, I might as well go all in. Since I was planning to only deal damage to the boss by Frostbite, I had basically no other priority in the fight than to keep it frozen, but unfortunately, anti-cheese mechanics made it so that I did actually have to fight it instead of just spamming X. Well, for the most part. I was actually starting to think that I was about to beat this boss hitless, but eventually did get hit once when trying to dodge around it. Once I got hit once, there was no objective left for me in the boss fight but to kill it without dying, so I admittedly got a little bit more careless, but I did eventually manage to win the boss fight, as is, of course, tradition. Stilled Village went pretty bad at parts where I tried to use my shield, and pretty great everywhere else. I found out the hard way that cannonballs don't respond well to hugs. In run 25, I sneezed the boss to death and it dropped some ice magic, which I reforged to make Biter Scroll from the dead, resulting in a pretty powerful mashup between modifiers that carried me out of the Stilled Village and into the Clock Tower. I reforged my Pure Nail, hoping for it to deal bonus damage against frozen enemies or something, but then it gave me the exact same modifier, except it also did more damage against bleeding enemies now. And since I also had a Sinew Splicer, bleeding was covered. It was a very difficult decision, and after at least 2 minutes of just staring at my monitor, I decided not to reforge the nail any further. The problem with having a primary weapon that causes burning and a secondary weapon that causes freezing is that those two status effects simply can't coexist. Of course, a new level meant new terrifying enemies that hit like a truck, and I'm famously vulnerable against vehicular assault, so you see how that went wrong. In run 26, I stumbled upon a weapon called Throwable Objects, which is pretty much exactly what it says. You just throw whatever at your enemies, and it's somehow incredibly powerful. I unlocked the Flint from the Collector, which is like a big hammer thing that smashes my enemies to pieces. Pretty much everything I encountered in the Promenade of the Condemned died in a single hit, and I managed to get a kill streak of 54 before another piece of weaponized annoyance left my dreams in the dust. I also got a lightning bolt from the Collector, which is, well, this. Unfortunately, I may have overestimated my strength in the boss fight and ended up kind of fooling around instead of trying to, you know, not die. In run 27, the boss dropped both ice magic and an ice grenade, which I took despite my Pure Nail having that burning modifier again. I tried to reforge it, but no luck. History repeated itself and I came to expire in the Stilled Village. We don't talk about run 28. Or run 29. Just don't. In run 30, I'm not even going to ask. The inexplicable 100-ton game reference gave me a card deck or something, which is basically 4 different items in one. And no, I'm not going to explain it to you because I still don't really know how it works either. I finally unlocked the 4th tier of the health potion, allowing me to heal 4 times each level, and also got this broadsword thing. It's basically the Flint from earlier, except it's just kind of bad. I found an item called Liposuction, which made every enemy I killed for the next 45 seconds drop an extra cell, so I went on a bit of a murder spree. While rummaging through the charred remains of my victims, I found a treasure item called Spartan Sandals, which are, well, this.
This is madness! Madness. This is Sparta!
Eventually, I found the treasure item, but then, my game crashed. In run 31, wait, this is from Terraria. I got a game reference! See, I'm not that uncultured. I know a few of these. I saw something cool and shiny behind a fancy door, so I made sure to acquire it using some shameless vandalism, but then, run 32, run 33 was, okay. Run 34. I immediately started out with the bone and the throwable objects thing. I managed to complete the first level in under 2 minutes, so I got some special loot, one of which being a direct upgrade for the bone. In the toxic sewers, I obliterated this elite zombie. I mean, seriously, I didn't even know what was happening. And when I found the slug person, I decided not to buy the ice magic because I felt like changing things up. Instead, I purchased this shield and put it in my backpack. Not sure what my strategy was there. I entered the ramparts in under 7 minutes, which also gave me some bonus loot, between which was another direct upgrade for my bone. I purchased a mutation from the collector called Melee, which causes my hits to slow down and freeze the enemies I attack. I tore my way through the ramparts, a whirlwind of death and pain, until eventually Explorer's Instinct activated. I don't really remember when I got it, I don't think I bought it from the collector, but it's very handy. Essentially, once I've explored about 80% of a level, it will discover the remaining part for me. I kindly relieved the boss of its spinal cord and managed to get to the Stilt Village in under 15 minutes, which granted me even more special rewards. I unlocked a root grenade, which somewhat intuitively roots enemies in place, then left absolutely no mercy for the Stilt Village's residents. I don't think you understand, I cyberbullied these guys so hard, they formed a support group. At 18 minutes, I entered the passageway to the clock tower. I set my mutations to include frostbite and melee, but also porcuback, which makes it so that any melee weapon in my backpack, in this case the frying pan, will deal the majority of its damage to enemies whenever I roll. The clock tower is a maze of sickeningly tall spires, and at the very top of one of them is a clockmaker's key, which unlocks a door to the timekeeper's room, which, if you still remember, is that boss I fought earlier. I replaced my root grenade for a powerful grenade, which doesn't really need an explanation, refilled my health potion, and finally, as prepared as I could be, walked through. I was actually a bit nervous before starting the fight, which is visually given away by the brief pause I made before entering. This was me taking a deep breath. Barely a few seconds after the boss's name card had faded away, I realized a mistake. Throwable objects, the range weapon I was using, only regenerated its ammo when I killed an enemy, so it was basically useless against bosses. I placed my sinew splicer and let it instill bleeding on the boss, then threw a grenade at it and went up impersonal. It wounded us both, but the timekeeper more than me. When it entered its second phase and my health potion was still full, I was beginning to sense the taste of victory. I successfully dodged whatever this attack is at the start of the second phase, then, with support from my sinew splicer, tanked everything the boss threw at me and finished it off. I didn't actually get the satisfaction of killing it though. It teleported away and there was nothing I could do about it. I entered High Peak Castle, which was exciting, for one because I'd never been here before, and secondly because the entire story revolved around this evil king or something, which meant I had to be getting close. Unless this was a completely different, unrelated castle. I certainly hope not. High Peak Castle is huge, not just because of sheer size, but also because there's many different color-coded doors sprinkled throughout the level, each of them leading to different sections themselves. I ended up in a room with 2 elite dark trackers, and before they could even start singing their villainous theme song, they suddenly found themselves inexplicably lacking kneecaps. They voluntarily gave me a key to the castle, which is a pretty misleading name because it's not a key to the castle. I was already in the castle. I drank the last drop of my health flask, then fought my way through the entire rest of High Peak Castle, fighting my way through the hordes of guards and killing 2 more elite enemies before finally arriving at the throne room. In Dead Cells, the final boss isn't the king, because that's just an old dude who talks about politics. No, instead you're fighting this behemoth of a dude, also known as the Hand of the King. He places his shield around the king in order to protect him, then turns around to take care of the vermin. In this case, that would be me. I got pretty much obliterated. I didn't know when he was going to hit, what he was going to try, or how I was supposed to react, so I only got it to about 60% of its health. Still fairly good, I'd say, because this is the very final boss. Once I beat this guy, I'm done. In run 35, I was about to enter the ossuary when a prominently placed golden chest caught my eye in the hallway, inscribed with an instruction that read nothing but "Go to the bank." And if there's anything I enjoy, it's jumping down suspicious holes, so I wasn't passing up on that opportunity. I entered a quiet waiting hall with no one to greet me except this receptionist, who really just went, "So there's a minor security breach in our bank. It's nothing to be concerned about, but I would really appreciate it if you'd take care of it. Got it? Thanks. Here's your pass. On you go now." So I, ever the helpful Samaritan, decided to do what I was best at. Beating people up. The bank was filled with enemies from all kinds of places, including some unique ones that somehow managed to make money a theme. I found some goblin and a pig, and for a moment I was a bit puzzled on what to do, so I decided to employ what always solves my problems: violence. That actually made the goblin thing cry, and for the first time in my massacring rampage, I felt guilty. Confused by this new, disgusting feeling, I figured that doing some more murders would probably make it go away. I found a blue pass, which allowed me to go to the blue level, and a green pass, which allowed me to go to the neon purple level. But I could also just leave if I wanted. Then I located a section of the level that would allegedly give me the next pass. I quickly discovered that if I touched the electric chain thingies, I was teleported all the way back to the start of the parkour section, so I tried a couple times and gradually got further, but eventually I was beginning to get low on health, so I had no choice but to return to the door I found earlier and exit the bank. Immediately after, I entered the Black Bridge, and after quickly taking care of the boss, the Stilt Village. I wanted to go to the bell tower, but accidentally opened the door to the Forgotten Sepulchre instead, which, yeah, let's just say it didn't particularly turn out as I would have preferred. In run 36, I found a door leading to a place called the Ancient Sewers. Since I hadn't been here before, it was classified as what the game called an incentivized biome. It's a way for the developers to prevent you from only going to the levels you're more comfortable with and to keep exploring. Because enemies drop a lot more loot in incentivized biomes, at least 3 times as much money in cells. Which is a trade-off, of course, because it's also a lot more dangerous since I didn't even know these enemies. I mean, what even is that giant mushroom thing? It's just a mushroom, and it does so much damage. You can find 3 of these old service keys in the Ancient Sewers, and if you hold on to them, you get to pick between a bunch of cool loot. I ended up wasting the first 2 keys on just opening random doors, but the third one I spent on this one with the cells. The cell? Then what if that gets locked up? Would that be the cell? Anyway, the reason why this incentivized biome and these extra cells are great is because that allows me to finally unlock the restock mechanic from the collector. I'll show you how it works later, but first, it's time for the Insufferable Crypt. Boy, that name's fitting. I entered the level, was like, wait a minute, then figured I had no other choice but to open the door, and came face to face with Conjunctivius. The boss fight is alright, I guess, but at a certain point, the boss becomes invulnerable to damage, and these little tentacle things start pouncing at you from beneath the ground. Only once you've killed all of them off, the actual fight can continue. I think this boss just kind of fails as a boss fight, because for 80% of the time, I'm not even fighting the actual boss, but playing whack-a-mole with these tentacle things. I beat the boss first try, and then continued to the next level. I was just busy with one of my favorite hobbies, jumping down suspicious holes, when I was suddenly rudely interrupted by this elite caster. I was doing pretty well until I, wasn't, but I managed to make it out of the fight alive. It gave me a spider rune, which allowed me to, well... Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Once I reached the top of the wall, I found a big glowing button. I pressed it, obviously, and then everything turned the color of piss and this spike ball jumped me. Sure, that might as well happen. In run 37, I started out with a King's Scepter, and I would rather want to wield a rock than a piece of garbage, so even though I could pay the tribute, I broke this fancy door to get a flint. 5 minutes later, my internal organs were no longer internal. Run 38 was the first time I used the torch, which is kind of strange because there's tons of those just hanging from the walls all around me. The torch, obviously, puts enemies on fire, which actually made it a pretty good weapon, so I felt like deeming this run a fire run. I found a slug person, which now had a very handy new button next to it that allowed me to reroll the shop's content, which might leave the vendor a bit confused, but I thought it was great. Whenever you reroll the items, they do get more expensive, but that's fair in my opinion. To stay on brand with my fire run, I picked up a fire grenade, which sets enemies on fire. Using the extra cells, I unlocked Light Speed, which is only called that because it sounds cool. The name has nothing to do with the actual item. It basically dashes you forward and deals damage to every unfortunate victim in your way. When I reforged my equipment, my torch suddenly got the modifier that makes me receive twice as much damage, and I just kind of went, I like those odds, and entered the Black Bridge. Let's just say statistics have never been my forte. In run 39, I found something called a corrupted artifact. It gave me a bunch of money, but also a curse twice as potent as normal. I was actually doing pretty well in lifting it when this stupid slime had my viscera for breakfast. In run 40, I entered another incentivized biome called the Corrupted Prison. I expected it to be filled with tons of new and treacherous enemies, but it was mostly ones I'd already seen before, so getting through wasn't all that stressful. I progressed through the ancient sewers into the insufferable crypt, which is, again, such a fitting name, but before entering, unlocked an item called the Swarm from the Collector. That was somewhat of a turning point for me, because, let me tell you, this thing is really good. It's a skill instead of a weapon, meaning that it's one of the items equipped in these slots that have active cooldowns. Think about things like the Sinew Splicer or Ice Grenade. Whenever I deploy it, it summons an army of 8 alien parasites to tear my enemies to shreds. I dealt 2 hits to the boss, then had to spend 5 minutes fighting tentacles, but instead of doing it myself, I could just let the Swarm do it for me. I defeated the boss and proceeded to the next level, until I suddenly stumbled upon another entrance to the bank. I entered, eradicated some more vermin with the Swarm, but then came to my unfortunate passing. In run 41, I found a passageway I could only enter using the Spider Rune, which led me to a level called the Prison Depths. Immediately as I entered, I was greeted by a cursed chest, and remembering how easy the Corrupted Prison was, I figured I'd take that gamble. Which actually ended up paying off, because the cursed chest gave me a pretty decent ice bow, with which I could lift the curse pretty much risk-free. There was a slight hiccup with this enemy though, which seemed to have a lot of health. I knew better than to try and fight it head on, so instead I defeated it by staring fearlessly into its eyes, and it was so terrified by my bold courageousness, it suffered from immediate cardiac arrest and died. But approximately 7.5 seconds later, all the 32 separate pieces of me unanimously agreed that it didn't really end up mattering. In run 42, I found my way back to the Corrupted Prison and decided to open the cursed chest at the entrance. I not only managed to lift said curse, but also achieved the kill streak of 44 before I was injured. After tickling Conjunctivius to death, I progressed to the Slumbering Sanctuary. Unfamiliar with the biome, I ended up taking a lot of damage to various different creatures, and by the time I found the piss button again, my health flask was empty. Still better than last time though, in the sense that I'm still alive. Scattered throughout the Slumbering Sanctuary are inconspicuous statues that, once the piss button is pressed, suddenly come to life. Among the depetrified enemies was this thing called a golem, which seems to have a very political opinion against breathing. Run 43. I decided to change things up for a bit, and for you to understand how I mean exactly, there's something I need to explain first. Throughout every level, except the ones with bosses, you can find these things called scrolls, which, once you pick them up, allow you to choose between 3 options, sometimes 2. There's 3 categories of items. The first one is Brutality, red, which includes most of the melee weapons I prefer to use. The second is Tactics, purple, which is the category for most bows and deployable skills like the Sinew Splicer and Crossbow-matic. The third is Survival, green, which includes most of the shields, some of the skills, and a rare few of the weapons. Whenever you choose between these 3 categories, your damage output in that category is permanently increased for that run, and you also find yourself obtaining more items in it. I almost always chose Brutality because it increased my damage output, and damage is pretty much all I care about. But for this run, I mixed things up and went with Tactics. In my Brutality runs, I always throw myself at the enemy, trying to dodge around their attacks and kill them before they ever manage to land a hit on me. But with the Tactics run, I found myself staying back a lot more, deploying my skills and shooting at enemies with the bow from a distance. It's a completely different playstyle, and it's interesting to vary. That being said, this run wasn't quite as successful because I didn't get further than the ramparts. And I hadn't quite gotten enough of that because in run 44 I did the same thing. In run 45 I discovered how to change clothes. I was very tempted to put on this Santa outfit called the Reverse Burglar, but then it turned out I could turn my entire character into a snowman. And that, yeah, it made the choice pretty easy. As far as the actual run itself went, it was much of the same, except the ending was unusually quick thanks to these 2 bellflies. In run 46, I found a really good swarm and a really good pure nail. I had a lot of fun in the still village with just throwing down a swarm and just kind of staring at my victims as they were simultaneously mauled to death and burned alive. It's hard to imagine a death more painful. Fortunately, all the enemies are zombies, so they don't feel pain. Probably. My weapon setup was looking really good, and the run was looking very promising. I just knew it was only a matter of time before I would find I'd had my fun with the snowman outfit, but it looked a bit janky, so in run 47 I changed to the commando outfit instead. I found a curious looking door, behind which were 3 more doors holding items I'd never seen before. So I experimentally broke one of them, and then suddenly got a curse 5 times as potent as normal. A warning would have been nice. Obviously, I ended up dying by curse. I like the swarm. I just kind of throw it in a crowd of enemies, kick back, relax, and watch as it plays the game for me. Feeling confident in run 48, I decided to give the Slumbering Sanctuary another try. Since the swarm has a purple background and is therefore a tactics item, I decided to make this another tactics run. I had no melee weapons, and next to the swarm was only equipped with a lightning bolt and a boomerang or something. I was skeptical too, but just look at it bouncing between enemies and tell me it's not good. I pressed the piss button, then made a run for it. In case you're wondering, I can't leave the Slumbering Sanctuary without pressing it, because next to making the level thrice as dangerous, it also opens a bunch of piss-colored doors, one of which leading to the exit. I saw a golem and immediately pretended I hadn't, but it wasn't giving up that easily and chased me down, then pulled me towards it, and then pulverized me. Okay, I know I'm probably using it a bit too much, but if the game hands it to me on a silver platter like that, how can I say no? Fun fact, the swarm destroys the enemies in the toxic sewers. They don't really stand a chance. It ended up working so well, I easily got a kill streak of 60. Did I say 60? Make that 91. The only reason I ever got damaged at all was because I made a stupid misjump. I fought my way through the corrupted prison and the ancient sewers, then yes! I nonchalantly swept the boss out of the way, then entered the graveyard. The graveyard is kind of like the promenade of the condemned, except most of its content is behind a locked door, so you have to get the key for that first. And with get the key, I mean watch with a sadistic grin on your face as the swarm tears your enemies to shreds. Anyway, once I obtained the graveyard key and entered the graveyard, I guess, I mauled some more enemies to death and then continued. The Forgotten Sepulchre was a lot more relaxed in a tactics run than with Brutality. Since the swarm did most of the work, I could direct my attention to avoiding death by the darkness, or just death by anything, I guess. I found the crypt key, then the crypt itself, and before I knew it, I was about to enter the clock room. To say I easily defeated the timekeeper would be a bit of an understatement. Suddenly, I was back in the castle again, only this time I found a door that led to a level called the Derelict Distillery. The first room required me to throw explosives against the wall in order to pass, which immediately set the tone for this level because it's heavily themed around explosives. At a certain point, I jumped into a room and immediately got a barrel of gunpowder smacked into my face, and my escape attempt, well, it was an attempt. In run 50, I found an ice bow with a modifier that made it so that its shots pierce enemies. This was really good because it allowed me to freeze however enemies were in front of me with just a single shot. Combine that with frostbite and you're suddenly invincible. I ended up getting to the ramparts in just over 7 minutes with a kill streak of 78, which just so happens to open both doors. The enemies of the ramparts didn't stand much more of a chance. I also had the card deck thing I got from the space whale earlier, set to create revolving orbs of lightning around my character, which shocks enemies, and, as a bonus, lit corpses on fire and made biters crawl from the dead. I reached a kill streak of 60 again and chose a quick bow that does bonus damage against frozen targets. Surprisingly, I actually got uncomfortably close to dying in the boss fight, but I managed to pull through. I found a tentacle with a bunch of modifiers, including more freezing stuff and bonus damage against electrified enemies, so I decided to put my quick bow in my backpack for now, just to try it out. One of its big benefits is that it poisons its victims, and since poison can coexist with the frozen status effect, it's just another power added onto the pile. I tried to reforge my swarm and was unsuccessful in getting rid of the burning modifier, but I was able to exchange the double damage thing for a poison modifier, which I figured was pretty good. I got wrecked by a spike ball, picked up the clockmaker's key and mowed my way through some more enemies, but started to get pretty close to dying, which was especially scary because my health flask was already empty. By the time Explorer's Instinct popped, I found the quickest way out and dipped. For some reason, I decided it was a fun idea to reforge my swarm, only for the very powerful poisoning modifier to be replaced by something garbage, so I had to reforge it for a second time, and by then I was too broke to do anything else. My build turned out to be pretty good material for boss killing, since all I had to do was keep it frozen while the biters, bite it. Rinse and repeat until the boss runs crying for his mommy. The boss dropped a really good crowbar, and I couldn't really pass that up. Oh yeah, I forgot to explain, this is a death orb. Pretty useful against slow-moving, powerful enemies. I came across an elite porcupine thing and proceeded to feed him to my infantry of very hungry biters, so he didn't have the chance to move as much as a single pixel before he died. I exchanged my crowbar for a frying pan, fought my way through the blue section of the castle, and then fought an elite slasher. I found the room with the 2 elite dark trackers again, but they obviously didn't stand much of a chance because they couldn't stand because I stole their kneecaps. And then suddenly we're back in the throne room again. This time I wasn't wiped away so easily. My strategy was to keep the Hand of the King frozen, but some kind of conflicting debuff kept thawing him, allowing him to try and shove me into these conveniently placed spikes in the floor. I got officially past the threshold for the previous run because this phase of the boss fight was new for me. The Hand of the King summons a bunch of obscure enemies to fight you for him, and I would complain about that, but I can't kind of do the exact same thing with my biter, so I guess we're even. I tried to use my ice ball on him and freeze him, but he just wouldn't stand still, and I never managed to get a shot in. And whenever I did, he thawed pretty much instantly. Still, although once again I hadn't managed to get him past half health, I'd learned a lot more about this boss fight, and I could actually see myself beating it now. Run 51, I unlocked the
Hayabusa.
gauntlets, which are actually pretty good. At 20 minutes I was in the clock tower again, casually slopping my way to victory, and then I exchanged it for a blood sword. But then I re-rolled the shop and saw a really good pure nail, and I just couldn't resist the urge. It turned out okay though, because when I reforged it, it also summoned biters. It also had a modifier that made it deal extra damage when you're at max HP, so I decided to fight with the pure nail until I got injured, which is when I quickly swapped to the blood sword in my backpack. I entered High Peak Castle and killed the first elite enemy without getting hit, but as soon as I took damage, I swapped to the blood sword. I sold the 2 elite Dark Trackers kneecaps on Craigslist, then fought the elite slasher dude, which I actually did without getting hit for once, so that's nice. I saw a blueprint for a cool boomerang thing or something, went ooh shiny, and then couldn't find my way out of the spike pit without dying. Of all the deaths in all the runs I did, this one may be the single most pathetic. Run 52, I got a bone, then a kill streak of 40 in the first level and 60 in the second. The boss didn't stand much of a chance against the combined power of my lightning balls and bone jitsu, and neither did much else in the slumbering sanctuary, until I found an elite room and it summoned an elite golem, which proceeded to promptly annihilate me. Run 53 was really not much different, except that I got another swarm, became way too cocky because of it, and died to the Black Bridge boss. Run 54 started out with firebrands and figured I might as well lean into the theme, gathering fire-related weaponry throughout the run until I got too careless in the Promenade of the Condemned and suddenly felt the urge to move to a happy farm-up state. But I kind of enjoyed that fire-themed run, so in run 55 I gave it another shot, acquiring a torch from the slug person, a fire grenade that summoned biters also from the slug person, and firebrands from a treasure item. I ruthlessly burned the boss alive, exchanged my torch for the gauntlets because they had a burning modifier, and the fire grenade for a cleaver for the same reason. I arrived at the clock tower, which was getting more and more comfortable for me every time I went there, but eventually my health flask ran out, and I died trying to scramble my way to the clock room. Run 56, I found a secret hidden in the floor, which eventually led to a secret door, but to open it I had this pressure plate before. However, I couldn't find more, which shook me to my very core, and I let out a bellowing roar. What then is this corridor for? Because I think not, the secret was a mere piece of lore, so for me the next 10 minutes were a bit of a bore. The run ended to a spike in the graveyard, whose mother I promptly called a whore. Run 57, I found another one of those corrupted artifacts, and 12 seconds later wished I hadn't. In run 58, I decided to go to the Forgotten Sepulchre again instead of the clock tower, and at first it went really well, but at second I was brutally murdered. In run 59, I was just vibing in the toxic sewers when suddenly this scorpion thing brought me down to a single point of health. I scurried away to heal when this bellfly suddenly interrupted me, but I thankfully managed to kill it. I then forgot I was trying to heal and threw myself right back into another horde of enemies, which, in hindsight, was not a very wise decision. After the many stupid deaths I'd been through, I decided to mix things up again in run 60. I'd done runs with both brutality and tactics, but what about survival? Now my strategy was to stay as far away from enemies as possible, by whichever means necessary, and whenever something was inevitably going to hit me, I parried. But it turns out that predicting when an enemy is going to unexpectedly hit you is pretty hard. I made it to the ramparts, killed a few enemies, mistimed some more parries, and killed an elite zombie, but eventually I was caught in a crowd of enemies I just couldn't go up against. The thing with survival is that it's actually much harder to survive with. It's a much more defensive playstyle, but being defensive isn't really useful in a roguelike because that's not going to make the enemies stop attacking you. Murdering them will make them stop attacking you. In run 61, I found a very good lightning bolt, which carried me for the rest of the Promenade of the Condemned into the prison depths, where I opened a cursed chest. Since the only thing survival is at least a little good at is not getting hit, getting rid of curses is admittedly easier than with brutality. I entered the ossuary, found a swarm, then left the ossuary and entered the passageway to the Black Bridge. I unlocked a war spear from the collector, which, as it turns out, is actually a survival item, and a pretty strong one too. I eventually died in the clock tower because I got sandwiched by these noobs. Run 62 was another survival run, but with a bit less survival than normal. Run 63 is also not much to mention. I got killed by this elite zombie, among other things. In Run 64, I decided I had enough of survival runs, for the next forever. Back in my much more comfortable playstyle, I much more comfortably played with style. Ice Bow and Bone, what an iconic duo. You can't really get further into my comfort zone. And it works too, because as soon as I obtained that bone and returned to my true form as a whirlwind of chaos and death, I amassed a kill streak of not 1, not 2, but 69. Okay guys, let's stay mature here. Once I left the graveyard, both of the bonus doors opened. That's how powerful the bone is. I mean seriously, there's really nothing that could make this run even better. Forgotten Sepulture also went pretty well. I decided to wield a war spear I'd found at first, but eventually just swapped back to the bone again, because it's amazing and you'll never take it away from me. Of course, the only way someone so powerful could die is bullcrap game mechanics. I lost basically all my health to the Forgotten Sepulture's darkness, and by then my health flask was empty. Despite that, I actually did pretty well, but I could only delay the inevitable for so long. In Run 65, I got an item that allows me to literally breathe fire, which, I mean, sure, why not at this point? That's what I'm talking about. Concierge? More like oh, he died before I could finish trash-talking him. Also, I discovered that you can still hit enemies with upward slashes from the pure nail if you stand right next to them, which is useful because each upward slash does critical damage. I've noticed I do kind of die a lot at the clock tower though. It's a pretty tough level because of problems I've mentioned earlier, and tends to be the bottleneck for most of my runs. The timekeeper though, I barely ever lose to anymore. Barely. And Run 66 was much of the same. I could sense I was getting fairly close to beating the Hand of the King, so I decided to stop trying to mix things up and just have fun. Anyway, as you can see, I managed to get all the way back to High Peak Castle, and obtaining the first key wasn't much of a problem, but the second one was. In Run 67, I was just attacked by a bat and frantically trying to check whether I'd contracted rabies when this sneaky inquisitor sniped me through the wall. In Run 68, after kicking this overachieving meatball to death, I obtained a pretty good Palo power, and even though I've yet to survive it a single time, I decided to give the Slumbering Sanctuary another try. I also had a really good new mutation active that executed enemies when they hit a certain percentage of health, which in practice means it often takes 1 hit less to kill them. That probably really helped in combination with Palo power. I navigated my way to the piss button and pressed it. At first, things were looking pretty good, but then a golem appeared and absolutely destroyed my health bar with a single punch. Fortunately, while it was so close, I had the opportunity to fart on it. The golem pulled me towards it again, but before it could land a second hit, it was already dead. The second golem encounter was a minute or so later. It kept trying to pull me towards it, but I just kept chickening out. And that pun was so horrible, the golem died of cringe. The third golem encounter came a bit unexpected. I was really low health because of another set of enemies, and once I ran back into battle, it slammed me right back down to 1 again. But with the power of chickens, I was actually able to kill it. But then I encountered a fourth golem, which slammed me back to 1 health again. In case you're wondering, yeah, I'm pretty sure there's some kind of anti-one-shot mechanic in place, avoiding enemies from just destroying you in 1 hit. I made it out of the Slumbering Sanctuary with 1 health point remaining. I was actually so relieved in this moment that in celebration I accidentally bumped the controller against my desk. But all great things must come to an end, and this time that end came not in the Slumbering Sanctuary but in the clock tower. In Run 69 I unlocked an item called the Wings of the Crow, which doesn't have anything to do with wings or crows, but it does allow you to levitate in the air and laugh as you shoot lightning bolts at the peasants down below. The run eventually ended when I wasn't paying attention to my health bar and got slapped to death by a random zombie. I gave the Wings of the Crow another chance in Run 70 and discovered it's also pretty useful for lifting curses or building up kill streaks. Also, you can find these things called Gardener's Keys in the Promenade of the Condemned, which open doors to mediocre loot in the same level. But if you bring them to the ramparts and squirm your way through a secret passageway to this hidden room, you're able to use them to get a Moonflower Key, and those Moonflower Keys unlock less mediocre loot all the way in High Peak Castle. That is, provided you survive the way there. In Run 71, I used the alternate route again and went through the corrupted prison, ancient sewers, and a mild annoyance. The run ended in the graveyard because I'm terribly allergic to explosions. In Run 72, I got cocky and died to the Black Bridge boss, which cost me 125 cells. It may sound painful, and the game is certainly making it look like that, but I'm not spending it on the collector anymore because I've already unlocked all the items I want. You see, one thing I haven't mentioned is that every time you kill a boss, an NPC appears in the passageways, which will increase the chance for weapons to randomly appear with an upgrade in exchange for actually insane amounts of cells. If you're not saving for a specific item to unlock, there's really no reason not to just ignore the collector in the passageways until you can spend your cells on something a bit more useful. Run 73 was a much more painful one. I made it all the way to the Clockmaker's Key, but died to a spike. We're in run 74, and it's about time I introduce you to the Wave of Denial. That's an actual item in Dead Cells. It's kind of like the Spartan Sandals in that it knocks enemies back, dealing bonus damage if you slam them against a wall. Basically, the power of denial is so strong, it creates a shockwave. Watch. I'm not annoying, I'm just funny. Anyway, I managed to get all the way to the clock tower again, mainly because I was using a new shiny weapon called the Ice Crossbow. Again, doesn't really require an explanation. It freezes stuff. Combine this with a swarm that does twice as much damage, and the bosses stand absolutely no chance. I made it all the way to High Peak Castle, but the aforementioned swarm also made me receive twice as much damage, which means already powerful enemies like the ones in High Peak Castle need basically one hit to slam me into an obituary. And now we're all the way in run number 75. 75 is a big number, especially when you realize it's more than 40 hours worth of playtime. But one thing I noticed while playing Dead Cells is that the combat never got any less satisfying. It's just so immensely smooth, mobile, and well balanced. I don't think killing things has ever been more fun for me than while playing Dead Cells. You don't destroy masses of enemies like they're nothing, but the way you move and dodge and attack makes it feel like you are. Dead Cells has a knack for making you feel invincible, even though you are far from it. Whenever I died in this game, I was never frustrated or angry because none of the mistakes I make feel like they're because of unfair game mechanics. Well, maybe except for the darkness effect in the Forgotten Sepulchre, but I never finished Don't Starve, so can you really blame me? I can positively confirm I was completely addicted to this game. At some point, I played 9 hours of this game in one day. And I'm not even a roguelike person. Anyway, as you can see, during run 75, I once again made it all the way to High Peak Castle, but I died to a random guard. In run number 76, after completing the ancient sewers, I saw an old friend in one of the cells. I brought him home, reforged him, and bam! 1390 damage per second, and victims release toxic clouds with each hit. Finally, I found it. The perfect weapon. Just look at the glorious amounts of death this thing can wreak. No, seriously, look, because if you blink, you'll miss it. Roses are red, I collect severed toes. Oh, and about your kneecaps? I'll just be taking those. Hey idiot, time for your last breath? Because you're about to get boned to death. I lied, I said it again. Hey, old friend, remember me? Well, it doesn't really matter. Okay, enough fooling around, it's finally throne room time. I made the boss bleed with a blood sword I could use with Porcupac, poisoned it with each hit of my bone, burned it with my fire grenade, which also made my bone deal more damage by the way, shocked it with my lightning bolt, and froze it with my amulet. You know what happens when you've achieved the true pinnacle of power? Death. Death happens. After 76 runs, I had done it. Now that the Hand of the King was dead, I got my first boss stem cell. These are basically extra levels of difficulty you can activate, which will keep the game fun to replay even after you've killed its final boss. Well, I should say its usual final boss, whatever that means. Now that the Hand of the King is dead, I can wield his weapon and use it to break the shield around the king. Not so tough now, are you? Well, apparently, yes, because the king wields an art even I cannot hope to defeat. The power of cutscenes.